People who cut off their family. What did they to you? Aunt in the rich part of the family made my mother clean their bathrooms one day when she told them we couldn't afford food. Unlucky situation. Both parents unemployed within days. Instead of just helping her out, they didn't even pay her. They gave her food they had prepared that day and some potatoes and oil. From that day on, my mother was so hurt and felt so humiliated I decided to pretend they don't even exist. I cut out my mother's side of the family. Her sister and brother made it their personal goal to financially ruin my parents. Then the other sister piled on. All three of them had been borrowing money from my grandparents for years, and when the other sister sold my grandparents' house out from under them because they can't live on their own anymore, my grandparents were appalled when they were told by my aunt that she was putting them in a home. So they lived with my parents instead, and the other siblings accused my parents of taking their inheritance. They harassed, stalked, and vandalized my parents' property until both grandparents were dead. I will never forgive them and hope their own children treat them as poorly as they treated my parents and grandparents. My mother used to beat the shit out of me on a daily basis. Lashed out for no reason than me being a child. Woke me up in the middle of the night to give me cold showers because I did something she judged to be out of line. It was really BS reasons most of the time. Put my face in garbage full of maggots because I forgot to tie the garbage bag before putting in the bin, mind you. I was still a child. She always did this when no one was home. And I was so afraid to say anything that my sister and dad didn't know it was happening until I told them a few years ago. I'm 29 now, with BPD, PTSD and anxiety because of all of this. I'm still struggling with all the emotions I lived during my childhood. To this day, she still doesn't understand why I don't want anything to do with her. She still calls my sister to get her to convince me to get in contact with her. My sister hasn't nagged me with this since she found out what happened. Now I'm living with my GF, who is the most wonderful and loving person ever. I'm glad I don't live in fear anymore. Edit. Whoa, this really blew up overnight. Thank you all for your kind words and support. To the person suggesting therapy, don't worry. It's already going on and I have a psychiatrist. BPD is borderline personality disorder. And no, it's not genetic. Well, mostly. Mine was developed through repeated trauma. Again, thank you all for the love. It really warms my heart. My cousin had addiction problems and just burned every bridge in our family. Used to be we'd buy him food and stuff he needs instead of just giving him money because it'd go straight to more drugs, but he eventually became so toxic we couldn't even do that. My father was an abusive alcoholic who left us when I was a teen after several suicide attempts. He was clearly not okay mentally. We reconnected in my early 20s, and when I finally started to build my trust for him again, he disappeared. He tried to reconnect with me a year later when he needed something. I haven't spoken to him since then. Edit. He attempted suicide. I was 10 years old. I was given to a 34-year-old man to be his third wife. My parents were so happy because it was a great honor to them that I was chosen out of all of the girls there to be with the man that was second in charge. I was smuggled out a month before my 13th birthday. Was deprogrammed. Tried to end my own life when I was 16 BC of what I went through. I'm still alive. I'll be 49 this year. I don't know if my parents are even alive. They threatened my life and then reported me to my country's officials for being a runaway. I was 26. A heathen. A whore. And, I wish this was a joke, a witch. All are crimes in my country. So yes, I have nothing to do with them anymore. I didn't. They did. I decided to leave Mormonism and they chose the church over me. My cousin, still a 12-year-old child at this point, lost both her parents and the family had to help her sell her parental house. Long story short, one of my aunts secretly sold the house without telling anyone and kept the profit, $250K, for herself. Everyone thought the house was still up for sale until the real estate agent informed my cousin's actual guardian, a different aunt, that my other aunt had sold the house and he thought it was sketchy. Good news though. My aunt was sued. Had to pay everything back and the $250K was directly deposited into my cousin her bank account, and my aunt received an additional $50K fine she had to pay my cousin and guardian aunt for emotional damage. We do not speak about this aunt anymore. Edit 1. For clarification. How it was even possible in the first place. It is complicated due to my late uncle and aunt's will. My cousin had 2 guardians after her parents' death. One was her general guardian, Aunt X. My cousin would move into their family home. And that aunt was made responsible for her school, her therapy, sports, social life, etc. The other guardian was my married-into uncle, my evil aunt, her husband. He was very good with finances. So he was made my cousin her financial guardian because my late uncle and aunt didn't want anyone to take advantage of my cousin in case of becoming an orphan. So 2 guardians they trusted would make it safe. So my evil aunt and her evil husband had access to all documents, keys, accounts. Like my Aunt X. They had secret house viewings. Found a buyer. Had the new buyer sign forged papers. My evil aunt forged Aunt X her signature. Had the new buyers deposit the money directly to their bank account. Gave the new buyers the green light to move in. Went to the real estate agent and said, "We don't need you anymore. We already sold it. And here you see Aunt X signed as well." That is where the real estate agent thought it was sketchy and thought to call Aunt X to thank her for the collaboration and wish her well now that it is sold. Mind you, the new buyers of the house were also victims here. But they were given their money back. And bought the house back via the correct way. Edit 2. My evil aunt said she needed some money and her husband was good with finances. So, they could borrow the money. Whilst my uncle would borrow the rest of the money. Turn it into stock. And make profit to pay the borrowed money back. So the judge asked how much profit they intended to make before telling anyone about their scheme. Well, if you think making 50K in profit was worth stealing and lying to a 12-year-old orphaned niece of yours, that is what you will pay her in extra. They never actually made any profit due to the short time period. But the family took over his investment plan. Secured part of my cousin's inheritance and used a smaller part of her inheritance to invest so that my cousin could have extra passive income for the rest of her life. Smiley face. Edit 3. Because so many people wonder why they didn't go to jail is because the entire family requested they didn't go to jail. The evil aunt and uncle had 2 small children at the time. So having 3 orphaned children in the time frame of less than half a year would have been a punishment for everyone involved. Also, this was early 2000 in a country that doesn't put people as easily into jail for civil cases as the US does. Also, I understand everyone is angry at my aunt and uncle on behalf of my cousin. Thank you. Though, my family doesn't like holding grudges. We do not actively hate them. They were in fact having financial struggles, in secret, due to something unfortunate happening with them. So everyone understood but felt betrayed in the end. My family only wanted my cousin to stay supported, and making my other cousins to become orphans wasn't an option. Excommunicating them from our family was their way of taking the high road. I found out my dad wasn't really my dad. And then my mother proceeded to lie about what actually happened. I experienced a childhood full of physical and verbal abuse. But he never laid a hand on my sisters. Now I know why. I corroborated the truth via other family members before cutting off all contact with mom and dad. Still close with sisters though. My sister was cut off about 10 years ago after several incidents involving her spreading rumors about me at my work for a 3rd time. She told one of my boss that I was a hard drug user. I never touched the stuff. She kept doing that after I warned her. I cut off the rest of my family when I confronted them about multiple historical events of physical abuse and torture from when I was a kid. They refused to talk about it and were verbally abusive about it. I cut them off about 5 years ago and my life has taken a positive turn since. Just stress. Every phone call. Every visit. Holidays. Events. Constantly berated. Questioned and feuding. I didn't cut them off in the sense of no contact. I just stopped caring. I don't ask. I don't get involved. Phone calls last 3 minutes because I have nothing to share. Everything is good here. Holidays I eat and leave. And I'm too busy for random drop-ins because kids have sports and friends and I have hobbies. When they come to me and vent, I simply respond in unique ways that they'll figure it out, and I'm unsure what I'd do in their place. Grew up in an explosive and abusive household. When I was finally able to move out, I started distancing myself. Mom went off the deep end. Started out accusing me of sleeping with every single person I know. Yes. Every person. Coming up with outlandish stories for why I was an awful person. Threatening suicide. When I cut her off completely, she started stalking me. I changed my number and moved to a new state. I did not give anyone, including my brother, my new home address, and started receiving cards in the mail from her last year. I was born female. My mother wanted her sacred little boy and hated my dad. She cheated on him and eventually left him for my stepfather, taking me with her for no other purpose than to hurt him. She had her precious, perfect little boy a few months later. From that point forward, I, then 6 years old, was treated like nothing but an inconvenience on the best days. It was clear that I wasn't wanted, and that my mother was doing everything in her power to keep me away from my father out of spite. She'd tell me I was so awful that he wanted nothing to do with me. I later found out that he kept looking, but every time he found out where I was, my mother and stepfather decided it was time to pick up and move. Unfortunately, I grew to resent him and wanted nothing to do with him by the time I was old enough to make any form of decision about seeing him for myself. Fast forward, I had ear infections that were neglected to the point of hearing loss. I was put through enough physical and mental abuse that I wanted to die by the time I was 10. I was ordered to do anything my brother wanted to make him happy. This included being his literal punching bag. Thankfully, he wanted violence and not anything sexual. They also liked to blow off steam by beating the shit out of me whenever they were stressed or in a bad mood for whatever reason. CPS did nothing. My mother and stepfather would be warned before they came. They'd clean the house and warn me that I'd be given to an even worse family that would hate me even more and hurt me even more if I didn't act like a real little girl and tell CPS that it was all a lie. That I was happy, and that I'd do anything to stay with my mommy and daddy. As soon as CPS left, I'd get beaten for making them look bad and having CPS called in the first place. As an adult, I now have hearing aids. My mother has insulted me about them and the hearing loss itself, as if they're character flaws. She also would not allow a phone conversation to end unless I was crying, sometimes to the point of vomiting. My father died of cancer 10 years ago, but we were able to repair our relationship in the 6 years before he passed. My stepfather also died of cancer after he cheated on my mother, gave her Hep C, and divorced her. My brother spent time in prison for vehicular manslaughter as a result of taking recreational Xanax, then striking and killing a trucker who was standing outside of his truck for reasons I still don't know. I believe there were other drugs in his system, too. He and my mother still blame the deceased and insist that the real victim was my brother. My brother is still extremely violent. I cut contact with him 4 years ago after multiple threats to my safety, and sometimes my life, and him telling me repeatedly that I'm alive because he and his father were kind enough to allow me to live, and I should be kissing his feet in gratitude. A year ago, after 3 years of no contact, he sent me a message telling me that he wanted me to know he despises every aspect of me at a cellular level. My mother expected me to apologize for forcing him to feel that way. I told her I wanted no further contact with either of them, and any harassment would be reported to the authorities. Then I blocked both. I'm 40. This was a year ago. My only regret was that I allowed them to do this to me for so long. I let my mother especially torture me for 39 years that I can't get back. And over a decade of therapy did little to nothing to help me. I still occasionally have trouble even believing I'm a real person. It wasn't bad therapists, the abuse was just that fucking bad. I moved 3,000 miles away almost 20 years ago. And it still wasn't far enough. If anyone is reading this and is still currently in the situation I was in, I only have this to say: run now and do not look back. They won't get better. You don't deserve this. And I don't want you to end up bitter and aged far beyond your years like I am. If I can't be a good example, I at least want to be a good warning. TLDR. They took away my personhood and a good part of my humanity. Edit. A few words. Mother was never really present, even after my father died. Father died when I was not an adult. House was left to 4 of his sons. One brother conned us into signing the house over to him for loan purposes to fix the house up. Stole house. Another brother stole from me and my family with high regularity. Forgave him a bunch of times. Kept doing it, so I gave up. Extended family, non-existent. With all that being said, I have a fantastic relationship with the last brother. Grandmother told me that's what I get for having children out of wedlock when my infant son died. Yeeted her ass right out the front door. Have not spoken to her in about 10 years. From what I've heard from an uncle, she is dying of a brain tumor. Could not happen to a more deserving person. My sister cut me off when I asked if she was engaged. Apparently it was incredibly rude and I ruined her engagement. The reason I asked, her and her boyfriend were taking a big trip. We had talked for months about the possibility that he would propose on the trip. 2 weeks before they left, he showed her the ring he bought her. On the trip she posted a picture of a dinner and she had a big shiny diamond on her left ring finger. But I'm the asshole for asking. Edit. I have no idea what the logic behind this is. Why whole family can't figure it out. But let me give you some context. I have a social media account but never use it. Like ever. Her and my brother were having a pretty heated debate. My husband asked a pretty neutral question trying to clarify something she said. He wasn't a part of the conversation. She started insulting him. Blocked him and blocked me, who wasn't part of the conversation nor had even been on it in years. But she still has my brother, who was the target of the heated debate. This is probably going to be long. My father beat me several times a week. From before I can remember until I left his house at age 18 after trying to kill him. To give you an idea of what I mean by a beating, I'll recount the first one I can still remember. I was maybe 7 years old. Possibly younger, but certainly no older. My parents were entertaining. So all of us kids, I was the 6th of 7, ate dinner early and went off to do kid things while the adults ate. Then loitered around drinking and talking. Naive child that I was. I hung out with the adults, listening to their conversation and occasionally offering up a comment. I don't recall what my father said. But he was incorrect about whatever it was. And I knew this because it was something that had been covered in school that day. So I corrected him. He said I was wrong and I doubled down on what I had said. Even going so far as to point out that we had learned about it in school that very day and giving him the correct answer. He just smiled and sent me to bed. So off to bed I went. Sometime later that night, he wakes me up by dragging me out of bed by my neck. He carries me into his bedroom, throws me down on the bed, takes off his belt, doubles it up and whips me. All the while cursing under his breath at me and telling me to never, ever contradict him again. I was 7. I didn't know what contradict meant. He whipped me until his rage was spent, then told me to go to bed. He was very free with his hands. Any challenge to his authority or knowledge would bring about an instant violent response. Except not for everybody. In the summer, we kids, the younger ones, anyway, would spend most of our summers at our rich aunt and uncle's house by the shore. My parents would come down on weekends. Or if they had some time off from work. One time, while my parents were there with us, I did something to piss my father off. He promptly dragged me off to a private room and gave me another whipping. I was about 12 at this point. Afterwards I come out and go lay down on a sofa in a side room. I had obviously been crying. My cousin, who was maybe 16, saw this and being very fond of me, got right in my father's face and gave him such a verbal bitch slapping that I don't think he ever recovered. She dressed him up and down and told exactly what she thought of a grown man who would actually whip a child because he couldn't control his temper. And he just stood there and took it. He wouldn't dare raise a hand against someone else's child. Ever. I was quite impressed with my cousin's courage. She was a petite thing but had no fear about ever so righteously cursing my father out. After the summer was over and we had gone back home, school had started up. One night at dinner my father kept talking about a French fashion designer, but kept mispronouncing his name. Say it Gu Vin Chi. Ever the helpful little idiot. I said it's pronounced Ji Von Ji. Without a word, he put his fork down and backhanded me right out of me chair. Now, you might think that at this point I would know better than to correct my father. And I did. I also knew that no matter what I did, I was getting a beating. So, I went out of my way to piss him off. Because every time I succeeded in making him lose his temper I considered it a win. Anyway, I picked myself up off the floor, said it's still pronounced Ji Von Ji and went on eating my dinner. He was absolutely volcanic with rage. But that was the end of the excitement for the night. Every night during my childhood, as dinner time approached, the dread began to set in. No. Not that sort of dread. My mother was a fine cook. If my father showed up for dinner on time, it meant that he hadn't been out drinking. And we would probably have a quiet night. On the other hand, if he was late, then we knew he was going to come home drunk. The later he was, the drunker he'd be. He often didn't come home until everyone had gone to bed. But we all knew what was coming and didn't dare just get into our pajamas and go to sleep. Typically we slept fully clothed, with a pair of slip-on shoes at the side of the bed. Continued in part 2. Mum told me she hoped I offed myself, most recent thing. Stepdad was a pedo. The rest hated that I wasn't mild-mannered and placid. And also wouldn't let me talk about being lesbian to anyone outside the family because of embarrassment. I grew up in a family that looked perfect from the outside. 4 kids and parents as a solid unit. One thing we never talked about was Dad's explosive anger, which led to episodes that he would never apologize for. Just be nice later and we would all just brush it under the rug. Cut to my age of 31 and I had been working with my father as a financial planner for 6 years, helping grow our client base. My mother and younger sister work with us as well as assistants. Only problem is every 6 months to a year I'd get fired by my dad. Massive blow up and a "fuck you. I have everything and you have nothing. Get out and I will never talk to you again." Then he would be nice in a day or two. Make some promises to put things in writing and we'd all just forget it. But you only want to bring up that contract so many times before you worried you would cause another episode. He would say things like, "You really think I would throw you, my daughter-in-law and grandkids out on the street?" You would think, "No, of course not. It is what you threaten and I do get scared, but no." He wouldn't actually do that. Surprise. That's what happens. Business value almost triples. He tortures me until I lose 17 pounds, and I'm a skinny guy, and I quit. Walk away with nothing. We end up hiring a company that works with family businesses for over $20K to help solve our family crisis. Specialists, psychologists and lawyers all involved. They write a report after interviewing every family member multiple times for hours and hours. Including my siblings that don't work there. Report comes out. My dad loses his mind. Fires the company that wrote the report. I make peace that it is all over. Start interviewing to just work at the bank. I have not been paid in almost 6 months. I have 2 daughters, 3 years old and 1 year old. But my dad comes back and starts making promises again. Rehires the family business specialists. We have a meeting where I agree to not take the position at the bank after 3 successful interviews. I will manage the business while my father vacations for a month and he will sell me my own clients. But I agree cause I don't really want to work at the bank. My dad leaves on his trip. I think things are finally getting worked out, for the 10th time, but he comes back a month later and won't answer my calls. I go and see him in the office and bring my 1-year-old who hasn't seen for 4 months. He says he is going to finalize the list of clients I am to buy. I haven't talked to my dad since. That was over 6 years ago. He ended up getting me fired from our investment dealer because I contacted his clients, even though he had either never met them or they were some of my best friends. Then he sued me. I had no money or any way to fight him, so I just abandoned everything and started over. I don't talk to my dad, mom, brother, older sister, grandma, aunts, uncles, cousins and many family friends. They all got my father's narrative. The patriarch said get out and everyone else just let it happen. Only my younger sister who worked there knows what happened and we are very close. We both just don't talk to our family. My wife and I are way better off and super happy. I made more money last year than I ever would have imagined and I'm my own boss. My brother saw me. My parents decided to hide it and told me if I'd tell anyone my parents would go to jail. They never got me the help I needed. Now many years later I'm getting help and trying to heal. My dad has decided he doesn't want any part in it. He would just rather be enraged about politics and my cousin being trans than to help me and stand up for something that actually matters. Whenever it gets brought up he changes the subject. I've since cut off my brothers and their families. I am working on cutting my dad off as well. Through no fault of our own. My mom and I became the black sheep of the family. We were excluded from family dinners, family get-togethers, and family trips. We decided we liked it that way. And just let it happen. Hakuna Matata. I haven't spoke to my family all in nearly 20 years. The day it all happened was the day I lost at least 80% of the problems in my life. Stepdad raised me from when I was 3. The primary thing I remember about him is fear. He was okay a lot of the time, but when something set him off he was really quick to anger. A snarl flashing across his face and his cheeks turning red, and he'd come at me. He wouldn't do much physically, the belt a few times, but he'd corner me and rant at me for hours. I don't remember a lot of specific incidents because I got good at disassociating, but the one that sticks out vividly is when I wet the bed and he grabbed me by the neck and stuck my face into it and told me he was going to train me like a dog. Even when he was in a good mood, he was a deeply unpleasant person to be around. He'd sit me down and lecture me for hours with talking points from AM radio. Highlights like women are going to steal your money and suck you dry. There's black people and then there's an asterisk, etc. While I looked out the window and wished I was anywhere else. When I turned 18, my mom left him and he told me he didn't want to see me again because I reminded him of my mom. I still thought of him as my father and tried to reconnect during college, but he said my Christmas card was a weak effort, and at that point I decided to just continue my life without him. A decade later we met at my sister's wedding, and within the first 5 minutes he said, "Wow, I thought you were trying to get in better shape. Well, I guess you finally got a decent job. Took you long enough." And then started ranting about trans people using women's bathrooms. I was cordial enough to avoid a scene at my sister's wedding, but it reaffirmed that I have no desire to have a relationship with him. Since then he bled his mother dry of money when she had breast cancer and then sued his siblings for a bigger share of her inheritance. They don't speak to him anymore. My siblings, his biological children, still have a relationship with him, but he's working on alienating them too. He told my sister she was not cut out to do anything besides secretarial work. She ignored him and is now very successful. He scammed $20,000 off my brother in a loan he's unlikely to repay. The last time he went to visit them, he saw a car double parked outside a pizza shop and made a detour to run inside and start yelling about it. Says he's not going to hold back anymore. Going to give everyone a piece of his mind. Talking about getting a gun. I guess he's contemplating dying alone, so he's texted me for the first time in a decade to tell me that I'm a shitty person and I owe him for Boy Scouts or whatever when I was a kid. Also said he was only playing my dad. Which, you know, fuck it. I'm happy to say at this point I was only playing his son. Edit. You know, the honest to God fucked up part and why I was in the mood to rant about all this today is that his text still got to me. I'm a grown-ass adult 30 years later and I still think maybe I'm a bad person. Maybe I was a shitty son. I know it's bullshit, but fuck. My uncle and aunt, whom I lived with from the age of 15 to 19. They always treated me as an inconvenience, even though they're the ones who suggested I went to live with them. They had me clean up after them and their kids. They got mad at me when I ate too much of their food, caused me to have stunted growth and an eating disorder. Made fun of me for being depressed and always discouraged me from doing any type of extracurricular activity at school because they didn't want me to make their kids seem like mediocre losers. They overshared family secrets with me and basically made me feel like I had to share those same resentments towards other people in my family in order to be welcomed into their home. To this day, I still have trust issues with everyone in my life and I rarely allow myself to make new friends. My new stepfather in a drunken rage tried to choke me out because I did not agree with his views. My mother did nothing to stop it and took his side. 22 years later, have not spoken to anyone in my family. Both my brother and I cut off all contact with mom and dad. My brother maintained a relationship with our uncle and I had a relationship with my aunt. My parents abandoned us at 14-15. My brother is a year younger than me. My mom pretended to help me, but never really did much. My dad was depressed, lazy. A decade later, my mom came back into my life. She regrets her previous treatment towards me and regularly helps me financially. My dad became homeless and had to stay with me, so I rebuilt a relationship with him. He's still lazy and depressed. My brother still doesn't talk to anyone. To put it short and simple, going through basic training was a fucking vacation compared to my childhood. My instructors would scream in my face every day. But at least I knew they actually cared under their cruelty. There was method to the madness to make us into soldiers. They were polite compared to my parents. Dad sexually abused sister. Mother and other sister chose his side. Yeah, we don't talk much. I haven't cut off my family. But I have been cut off from a part of my family. When my father died, I was 10. My mother remarried within a year. My bio-father's family cut me, my brother and little sister off because of that. I've seen my grandmother on that side once, like 15 years later. right before she died a month later. Luckily my stepdad adopted us and became legally our dad and has treated us as his own every day of his life and still. I copied this from another post that I commented on. I haven't had contact with my mother since I was 7. I cut contact with my dad and my grandmother when I was 19. I'm now 28. And I can say cutting contact is one of the best decisions I ever made. My mother kidnapped me from my dad when I was about 6. Beat me. Let her friends beat me. Gave me 1 meal per day. When her and her friends were bored, they would restrain me to a chair and force feed me. They'd stick a heaped spoon down my throat. And the spoon again, my throat was painful. My mother waterboarded me. She dumped me on her friend. Despite knowing that her friend's daughter repeatedly molested me. The daughter was in the same class as me. And assaulted me at school too. After being abused for a year or so. She lost custody of me when I was about 7. My father resented having a child. And took it out on me. He fought for custody to make himself look better to other people. Regularly blamed me for shit that wasn't my fault. Screamed at me when the chair he was sitting on broke underneath him. Slammed doors and cupboards. Insulted me for not knowing how to do basic chores. But wouldn't show me how when I asked. Ignored paying bills. So he could buy toy car models. And would then complain when he had to pay more on a bill the following month. Regularly called me names like stupid cunt. Shouted at me for showing any emotions other than neutral or happy. But not too happy. Had a go at me when I was a preteen. Because I cried watching All Dogs Go to Heaven. He would call me lazy because he never saw me exercise. Despite him knowing I regularly went out with friends. He would complain that I spent too much time indoors, despite regularly going out with my friends. But on the days I'd be out with friends, he'd then complain that I'm out too much. He would often minimize what my mother did to me. And would outright brush me off about the bullying I experienced in school. Repeatedly told me I was lucky and had an easy life compared to him and his mother. When I would remind him about what my mother did, he would tell me it wasn't that bad. My grandmother, including her. Because when my mother lost custody, my grandmother became my legal guardian and would take on childcare when my dad was at work. Did more harm to my mental health than my parents combined. Was a manipulative and gaslighting old hag. She was a total narcissist. And always believed her word was law and that her opinions were facts. Even when outright shown evidence to prove her wrong. Would buy me clothes. And tell me that I needed to tell her if it was something I didn't like. Because then she could return it. But if I told her I didn't like it, she would throw a massive tantrum and tell me I don't know why I even bother with you. If I pretended to like something she brought me, just to keep the peace and avoid her tantrums, she'd go on about how I never wear it. She was constantly overcritical of me. She would call me lazy simply because she didn't see me being active with friends. I would go out with friends and run around and play with them. But because she wasn't there, that time just didn't exist to her. When I got an A in GCSE English, she huffed at me that it was only an A and not an A star. When I got an A star in A-level film studies, she scoffed and said it's only film studies. When I said I wanted to move to Canada, she screamed at me that I can't move country. Because they won't have my bank over there. I checked and my bank has been established there for about 50 years. And it's not like I can't just change bank. She repeatedly treated me like a doll. And would throw tantrums if I did a thing to my body or hair that she didn't like. I once dyed a streak of red in my hair. And when I next saw her, the first thing she said was I don't like it. I told her that I like it. And that's what matters. She stomped her foot like a toddler and shouted, well, I don't. She would regularly do seemingly nice things. But would use that to try and get her own way. When I was sorting out my prom outfit, she repeatedly interfered. For prom she gave me a present of paying for my hair to be styled. I came with a photo of what I wanted, which was a rock chick style. And I left with a perm. She told the hairdresser to do it behind my back. For prom she brought me a necklace that she knew wasn't something I would like. She always said she knew I liked dainty jewelry. And the necklace she got was massive and way over the top. She also knew I had planned for years to wear a necklace my aunt got me. When I tried to talk to her about it, she threw a tantrum. When I'd get back from school, she would ask if I wanted anything to eat. And if I said no, HLSHE would put something together anyway. If I didn't eat it, she would say it was because I was ungrateful. If I did eat it, She would say I'm lazy and will only eat if someone puts food in front of me. She regularly commented on my eating habits and told me I'd get fat if I kept eating that way. She single-handedly caused my anorexia and OCD. And she was partially responsible for my social anxiety. She was extremely racist. And regularly stated that anyone who isn't white or English should be kicked out of England. She also believed that black people should be killed. When her called her out on her racism, she would claim to not be racist. Once when I said racists should all be imprisoned, she scowled me and said, "Oh thanks." When I was still a preteen, she kept telling me to avoid the black kids in school because she believed they had nits and diseases. She would blame outbreaks of lice or chickenpox on the black kids in my school. She regularly trash-talked any of my friends who she didn't consider to be British or English. She claimed that she wasn't homophobic. She just thought they needed to keep it in their own home and that they shouldn't be allowed to be married. She was proudly hateful of bisexuals. I was a closeted bisexual until I cut contact with my relatives. The first person I told. I expected to get shamed. Even though I knew he was also bisexual. She's just outright the nastiest, most narcissistic person I've ever met. She went on about me being lucky. And how her life was so much harder and worse than mine. And how I'm too young to have been through anything. If I brought up that mother's abuse, she would brush it off. She repeatedly encouraged my bullies to continue bullying me, but would also brush off any of my complaints about bullies. My family started to distance themselves when I came out as a lesbian. Now that I'm officially married to another woman, they have completely cut off all contact with me whatsoever. My mom is the only person in my family who still talks to me. TW pedophilia. My great-uncle *Shuli abused his own granddaughter. My great-aunt. His wife took his side as well as some other family members. So cut off contact to these family members from my paternal side. Also I ruined his life later on. Smile. My father knows exactly how to hurt me emotionally and does it with a disturbing amount of glee. His family is convinced he's a good person that will move heaven and earth for me. They decided having a gay family member gave them the right to treat me like shit. Been 7 years and haven't looked back. Best decision I've made. My birth mother was totally unprepared for motherhood and considered me a threat to her relationship to my dad. She locked me in my room at 3 for several hours a day and hit me with spoons. In middle school she left over homecoming weekend to see her boyfriend. Dad was still married to her, and missed my freshman homecoming. She doesn't care about me at all. Didn't completely cut them off, but I'm extremely estranged. Mother was very neglectful of me growing up. Drinking problem and depression. Would rather buy cigarettes than food, so I was hungry all the time. Didn't pay rent, so I was scared and embarrassed because landlord would approach me on the street. Left me alone for long hours when I was young and I got raped, and her first words were, "Don't tell your brother. He won't know how to deal with it." Suffice to say I knew I needed to take care of myself and stop letting them hurt me. My dad died the day before Father's Day. She who birthed me openly disregarded every one of his final wishes. Up to and including the place of burial. Since then I've gone full scorched earth. Never mind the years of physical, psychological, and financial abuse meted out to the both of us all our lives. I was prepared to forgive her up to that point. For him, no. She called my father weak for not making his wishes known to her. And stated that mental illnesses were a hoax. A crutch for the weak. I informed her right then and there that I was no longer her child. And she can rot in that miserable mausoleum she calls a house. I am organizing a proper memorial service the way Dad wanted. I've also been making covert trips, taking everything of sentimental value from Dad's upstairs apartment when she hasn't been home. And I have opened a separate bank account preparing for the day she dies. I have Dad exhumed and buried in the place he loved and wanted. I will make everything right that she has wrong. Mark my words. She is dead to me. And anyone who stands with her is an enemy. I don't talk to family that poison the well with other family. If they talk too much about other family members, I don't talk to them. I had a baby when I was 16. Because I was so young. I had to continue living with my parents along with the baby. When I turned 18, my parents encouraged me to go off to college and said they would look after the baby while I was gone, and then I could have my child when I finished school. Of course, I visited my child all the time. But my parents and my sister started a smear campaign against me, stating that I was a terrible mother who abandoned her child. I knew things were being said, but I didn't realize it came from the people who were closest to me. I didn't really find out the level of cruelty until I finished school and wanted to resume care for my child. My parents got a lawyer and threatened to make my life hell if I didn't walk away. I was broke, young, and naive, so I walked away. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, but I cut them off. I had to for my own sanity. My child and I have a great relationship now. Despite everything my parents did and the lies they told to keep their grip on my child figured it all out on their own. They realized the truth. My mother and I haven't communicated in any form for coming up on 17 years. Probably easier to list what she didn't do to me. But there's no love lost, and if I never saw her again, it would still be too soon. Ever feel like you are invisible and the world down at see you? Imagine that every time you went home. Then imagine all your friends and their families treating you like you mattered. Only to go home and be invisible again. Then imagine you're a teenager and you're being abused verbally and mentally. Then imagine your friends and their families going to bat for you and having your back no matter what. Only to go home to verbal and emotional abuse. Now imagine being an adult who is self-reliant. I no longer talk to my blood family. But my family has now become my friends and their families. I was adopted. And a hyper-obese kid. Like 600 LHS super early on. They would literally mock and put blame on me for everything. One day my grandfather died and in the hospital. My grandmother and mother screamed it was my fault because I was so fat. Never forgive them. A few years later. Left and never looked back. Locked me in the basement with no food. No electronics other than a CD player. No outside communication at all. Just the same books I read over and over again, including but not limited to Sexual Homicide, Patterns and Motives by John E. Douglas, Ann Burgess, and Robert Ressler. This started at age 13 until I ran away from my father and stepmother at 14. I'm currently polite to my mother because I'm financially dependent on her. But once I'm not, I'm cutting her off as well. She sent me to conversion therapy when I was 16 and not only refuses to apologize, but she also said she'd do it again. Got tired of my overdramatic gaslighting narcissistic mother's behavior. Wrote off her. My dad, who always backed her up no matter what, and both of my sisters since they're her flying monkeys. Life is good without the stress of their involvement in our lives. Treated my grandparents like shit and prevented them from having an acceptable end of life. The nail in the coffin of our relationship was when my uncle, their son, stole their house for $85,000. Which would have been an acceptable amount in 1982. At this point, my grandparents were no longer legally able to consent to the sale. But he pretended they were. If he had bought the house for the price of the market, my grandparents would have had the means to live their remaining days in a proper home that offered acceptable care for elderly people. Instead, they died in some shithole residence that smelled like crap. Had to cut off ties with my mom. Context. I'm married. 2 young kids. Mom's boyfriend of 10 years dies suddenly. Just before COVID hits. Mom calls up one day and unloads 10 years of grievances against myself and, more specifically, my wife, stating the boyfriend told her to deal with it and that we were all happy. So keep it to herself. Mom went off. Said my wife controls me completely. That she has ruined our family and is mentally ill, because she took a 10-question quiz on the internet, pretending to be my wife. Says this is her truth and reality, even though the few specifics she could point to as my wife ruined it were actually not true and laid out the details. But mom refuses and again says, not her reality. Cut to a while later. Letting feelings simmer. Mom isn't mad anymore, so we shouldn't be either. And denies saying any of the bad things about my wife or family, except the mental illness part. Basically gaslighting us into being the bad guy. So, until she takes accountability for what she has said. Apologizes. We are done. After my grandmother passed, one of my sisters tried to sell her house. The house was left to one of my brothers and I on the condition that we maintain it and let our aunt who had polio live there as long as she could. Aunt left for a month to see a specialist and get started on a new PT treatment regime. Came home to find a realtor showing the house. She was completely unapologetic about it and tried playing it off as she was doing us a favor because we would no longer be responsible for the house. Half my dad's family don't speak to him. When my granddad died, he left his farm to my dad. My dad decided to continue the work his father was doing and work on the farm. His siblings were furious he didn't sell it and split the money. Still to this day, he works on the farm. And his siblings don't speak to him. Must be going on over 15 years. I guess it wasn't his fault for being a parasitic twin. My dad passed away 5 years ago. His family is notorious known as the people who get drunk. My dad's funeral was pretty good until my uncles got drunk. We still have contact, but there's not a lot of contact with them. Only talk to me to ask for money any other time I don't exist. No content when my wife passed away other than who gets the estate, what is left when I am gone as well. None of them gets anything. I have made arguments, it all goes to my one graduator who does talk to me. And treats me with respect. I have in the past helped each and every one of them in times of need. No more. My bio mom has several mental illnesses and often says horribly mean things to me. The one that got her cut off was when she told me she wished I would get bent over and r*ped because I voted for Obama. We didn't speak for 5 years after that. Not me. But my BF cut off his whole family except his sister. And her status is pending. His mom was super homophobic. And she threw a major tantrum when he took me to meet her and threw us out of the house. His dad, parents are divorced, told him a bunch of awful things over the phone about how he'd rather have my BF be dead than gay. As soon as he hung up the phone, my BF started crying. And that's been the last time he talked to his father. That's how bad it was. His sister is fine with us. But every time we see her she's really weird and flirty with me. It makes both my BF and I really uncomfortable. So he's asked her to stay away until she can handle herself. It's pretty fucked up. But luckily they live in a different state. My family loves him and have basically adopted him as their own. I think they like him more than me, lol. Overall, it's pretty tough. But he's working through it. If you're a parent, or one of your family members is gay, part of the LGBTQ community, don't be an asshole, please. My dad passed away in 2004. He was 46 years old. Heart attack. He came home from work at 3:30 p.m. We were back from the hospital at 9 p.m. with him pronounced dead. I was 13. My brother was 15. We never loved my dad's family. We never looked forward to seeing them. And there always seemed to be no fun had with them at cookouts or parties. I am sure the sudden death had a lot to do with it. But after he passed I became hyper aware of how his family treated my mom. Who is the strongest person I know? 2 examples. First, my dad's parents lived across the country. And instead of boarding their dog, made us delay the funeral by 2 days so they could drive. Apparently boarding your dog for a while or being there for your grandsons was an easy choice to make. Second, an aunt of mine, while opening a check my family received at the funeral from my mom's lifelong best friend, remarked, "Wow, must be nice," in reference to the money we received to help us survive for a couple months. Cut them off months later. It's been nearly 20 years. And it is one of the best decisions I ever made. My dad is a sex offender. He raped a family member. I hear he's not doing well. He needs a kidney and some other stuff. Someone found him on the floor passed out and all. I care. But not really. Maybe a little. His sister reminded me to call him. But I'm not. He did call my mom to check up on me after I was in the hospital. Nothing so bad that it's going to the skyrocket to the top of this thread. And I deeply feel for the people who suffered the horrible shit here. But basically, I decided being emotionally neglectful and never changing was enough to cut my mom out of my life. While I wouldn't advocate for the nuclear option being anyone's first choice, I would say that ultimately you don't need a big blow-up or inciting incident. Choosing yourself is enough. I'm no contact with my sister. She was a difficult child, especially as a teen, and did stupid shit like date my ex-boyfriend, etc. After I had a baby, she would email and text me nonstop about how I could sell my plus-size clothing online and make a bunch of money. She became a gym rat and would body shame everyone on the family. She scammed the military into early retirement and does nothing all day except go to the gym and grift. My mom thinks she's the greatest, but I can't stand her. transphobic and homophobic. I cut out my entire side of my mom's family after her funeral. I was 17. Her family had always been a difficult bunch. My mom had a stalker at the time of her death. He claimed to the family he was her fiancé. And they believed him over me. Despite the restraining order and proof of abuse. They chose that man over me. So I cut them out. Them only contributing a $100 donation to the funeral costs really helped that decision also. She had 3 birth siblings and 12 adopted siblings. Several aunts and uncles and cousins, and they came up with $100? Fuck that and them. That was 8 years ago. Last I heard, her stalker spent Christmas with them. So my choice feels validated. I made the difficult decision to cut ties with my family. Years of toxic dynamics had taken their toll on my mental and emotional well-being. The constant criticism, emotional manipulation, and lack of support had stifled my growth and happiness. Despite my best efforts to mend the relationships and seek understanding, the toxicity persisted. It became clear that my own well-being could only be prioritized by breaking free from this unhealthy environment. With a heavy heart, I chose to sever those family ties. It wasn't out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I yearned for a brighter future. One filled with positivity, love, and genuine support. In the process of cutting off my family, I embarked on a journey of healing and self-discovery. I learned to set boundaries and rebuild my sense of self-worth. Chosen family and supportive friends became my pillars of strength, uplifting and encouraging me along the way. I realized that family is not solely defined by blood, but by the bonds of love, understanding, and respect. By creating distance from those who brought harm, I embraced my own identity without the burden of seeking constant approval. Though the decision was difficult, it was necessary for my own happiness. I found solace in reclaiming my freedom and authenticity. I walked confidently into the unknown, knowing that I had made the right choice for my well-being. This journey became a testament to my resilience and the transformative power of self-love. I learned to forge my own path, free from toxic ties, and embraced the potential for a brighter future. And so, I continue to embrace the possibilities that lie ahead, knowing that I am creating a life filled with peace, growth, and the love I truly deserve. My drug addict cousin took 12+ Xanax at a party. Multiple people had to tell him to chill the fuck out. At like 4 a.m. my friend asked him to be quiet cuz everyone was sleeping and my cousin was stumbling around the house. So in response my cousin knocked him down and ground-pounded his face a dozen times. He tried to apologize the next day and I ignored him. A couple weeks later I was up north hunting, while my cousin showed up at my family's Thanksgiving dinner. My brother later told me that my cousin was bragging about it, even saying my friend had it coming. Piece of shit human. Lived with my brother for 3 months. Thanks to him stealing my food and eating everything in the apartment, I was often limited to a single can of creamed corn, the only thing we had that he wouldn't eat, a day. I lost 60 pounds in 3 months and still have health problems related to it. I don't talk to him anymore after that. One branch of the family tree. Uncle was peeping up my wife's skirt at Christmas. Uncle used my grandpa's funeral as a jumping-off point to go on a rant about President Trump. Speaking of grandpa's funeral, Uncle showed up in muddy camo boots, jeans, and a hoodie with a Busch Light can at a church. Uncle drove Aunt to attempt suicide after a horrible series of events wherein his business went bankrupt and they had their house foreclosed on due to financial fraud. Aunt said that my mom was unfit because my sister got a tattoo, not just as a joke. But like Aunt hasn't spoken to my mom in years because of this. Aunt slut-shamed my wife for wearing too short of a skirt, which caused my uncle to peep on her. Cousin called me a fucking loser who can't hold a job down because I put a positive Instagram post up on President Biden's inauguration day, after I shared evidence that the Trump tariffs led to a company downsizing wherein I was not retained. His post actually sent shockwaves through the rest of the extended family because he's such a good kid. He just doesn't make posts like that. Same cousin, prior to this, told me, in person, that I need to keep my woman under control on Facebook. After my wife posted something about I don't even remember anymore. It was one of the Trump scandals. I'm creating my own family. Grew up Mormon. Left the church at 18. Parents wouldn't talk to me except to tell me I was deceived by Satan and living in sin. Eventually just stopped talking to them except to coordinate visiting family. Now, over 10 years later, they're trying to reach back out and talk to me about my life, but I've learned to live without them so long. I don't have the need for them in my life. It's mostly small talk like with a stranger in a bar. It's hard to fit them back into my life when they had no place for so long. Plus I'm pretty content in my life without them. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.